In October 1971, a young man sat alone in a small flat in London, unable to sleep. He had not spoken to his friends in months. He had not performed on a stage in years. He had 2 albums to his name, both of them ignored, both of them quietly gathering dust in a warehouse somewhere. His name was Nick Drake, and he was about to make the most important album of his life. The only problem was, nobody would hear it, not for a very long time. To understand Pink Moon, you first have to understand what came before it. Nick Drake's first album, 5 Leaves Left, had been released in 1969. It was a delicate, extraordinary thing. Acoustic guitar wrapped in string arrangements, a young voice singing about rivers and time and the weight of being alive. Almost no one bought it. His second album, Brighter Later, came in 1970. Joe Boyd, his producer, threw everything at it. Jazz musicians, orchestral flourishes, a warmer and more accessible sound. He believed this was the record that would break through. It sold even less than the first. By the time Nick Drake reached 1971, something fundamental had shifted inside him. Friends described a man who had gone quiet in a new and frightening way. Not the gentle quietness of before, something heavier, something that didn't lift. He had moved back to his parents' house in Tamworth in Arden. He sat in his room. He rarely spoke. He barely ate. He was 23 years old, and the world had decided, without ceremony, that it had no use for him. And yet, something was still happening in him musically. Those who visited him in this period, and there were few, sometimes heard him playing alone in his room. The sound had changed. The strings were gone. The jazz musicians were gone. The arrangements were gone. What remained was just a guitar and a voice, stripped back to almost nothing. And somehow, in that almost nothing, something completely new had appeared. In late 1971, Nick Drake contacted John Wood, the sound engineer who had recorded both of his previous albums at Sound Technique Studio in Chelsea, London. He said he wanted to come in, alone. No producer, no band, no one else in the room. John Wood agreed. He trusted Nick Drake. He had always believed in him, even when no one else seemed to. On the first night, Nick Drake arrived at Sound Techniques carrying only his acoustic guitar. He sat down on a stool in front of a single microphone. John Wood set the levels from the control room. The tape started rolling, and Nick Drake began to play. What came out was unlike anything he had recorded before. The guitar parts were reduced to their absolute essence, finger-picking patterns so sparse that the silence between notes was as important as the notes themselves. The voice was close to the microphone, intimate, as if he were singing only to himself. There were no overdubs, no second takes layered on top of each other. Everything was recorded live, in real time, exactly as it was played. John Wood later said that Nick Drake barely spoke during the sessions. He would finish a song, there would be a silence, and then he would begin the next one. No discussion, no playback, no adjustment, just the music moving forward. On the second night, they finished 11 songs, 28 minutes and 36 seconds of music, recorded across just 2 evenings in a small London studio. Nick Drake had titled the album Pink Moon. The name came from a traditional term for the full moon that appears in April, a moon that signals change, the arrival of something new after a long winter. There was one overdub on the entire album. On the title track, Pink Moon, Nick Drake added a single piano line, 8 notes, that was all. Everything else was him, alone in a room, with a guitar. John Wood mixed the album. It was ready. It was done. It was, by any measure, a remarkable and complete piece of work. And then Nick Drake did something that no one who knew him has ever fully been able to explain. He took the master tape. He put it in a plain envelope. He drove alone to the offices of Island Records in London. He walked to the reception desk. He placed the envelope in front of the receptionist. He did not ask to speak to anyone. He did not leave a note. He did not say what was inside. He turned around and walked back out. The receptionist opened the envelope. Inside was the master tape for Pink Moon, the entire album, finished, mixed, and ready for release, with no accompanying message of any kind. Island Records released Pink Moon in February 1972. They did not promote it. There was no press campaign, no interviews, no tour. Nick Drake had made it clear in his wordless way that he would do none of these things. The album sold fewer than 5,000 copies. Reviews were sparse. The few critics who noticed it were kind but uncomprehending. They did not know what to do with an album this bare, this interior, this resolutely uncommercial. Island Records dropped Nick Drake from their roster shortly after, quietly, without announcement. Nick Drake died in November 1974. He was 26 years old. Pink Moon had sold almost nothing. For the next 2 decades, the album existed in a kind of shadow, known to a very small number of people, whispered about, passed between those who had somehow found it, like a secret too heavy to keep. Slowly, through the 1980s and 1990s, something began to happen. Music writers started writing about Nick Drake. Other musicians, R.E.M., The Cure, Paul Weller, began citing him as an influence. A quiet reappraisal gathered momentum. And then, in 1999, something happened that changed everything. Volkswagen licensed Pink Moon, the title track, for a television commercial in the United States. The ad showed a group of young people driving through the night, the windows down, the song playing softly. It aired during a major broadcast. Millions of people heard Pink Moon for the first time. Overnight, the album re-entered the charts. Sales spiked. A generation that had never heard of Nick Drake suddenly needed to know everything about him. Island Records reissued his entire catalog. Pink Moon was reviewed again, this time unanimously, as a masterpiece. Today, Pink Moon is considered one of the greatest albums ever recorded. It appears on every serious list of essential recordings. Scholars write about it. Musicians study it. It is taught in music schools. 28 minutes of a man alone in a room with a guitar, recorded in 2 nights, delivered to a record label without a word. Nick Drake never knew any of this. He died 25 years before the world decided to listen. That is the story of Pink Moon. Not just an album, a message in a bottle thrown into a sea that wasn't ready for it yet. If this moved you, there are more stories like this every day on this channel. Subscribe to Unheard and Gone, and don't miss a single one.